Like most 200-page reports, the independent audit of the Canton Police Department has something for everyone. And I do mean everyone. Whether you are Team Karen Reed, Team Commonwealth, or just here for the chaos, buckle up because this report is absolutely loaded. Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Let's start with what helps Karen Reed. The audit says first responders should have photographed John O'Keefe's body before EMTs moved him. And the crime scene, it was left unguarded. Canton Police Department, they didn't have the right equipment to collect and preserve key evidence. If you've been following the case, you know that those are exactly the kinds of issues that the defense has been hammering on for more than a year. Now, to be fair, the report also gives something to the Commonwealth. It explicitly says there's no evidence of a police conspiracy to frame Karen Reed or to protect the Boston cop, Brian Albert, who owned the house where John O'Keefe was found dead in the front yard. Now, that's a big deal that's in there. I've spent hours combing through every page of this audit so that you don't have to, pulling the most important details, cutting through the fluff, making sense of what it all means. The people who wrote this report clearly think it supports law enforcement and the prosecution. In some ways, it does. But here's the twist, in my opinion. The core findings back up what Karen Reed's legal team has been saying all along, that the investigation into this crime scene, this alleged crime, was wildly mishandled. And they tried to downplay it in this report. They tried to frame it so it would not impact the case, but I don't think they succeeded. So let's get into it. Special shout out to the first 5 in tonight's chat. Chad Lucas, Oklahoma GG, David 67, Not Your Edits, and Neurosite Zena. Welcome, and welcome to everybody. Be sure, if you would, to hit the like button, and so it'll get out to more people, and also subscribe. We would love to have you back for more. Now, let's talk for just a minute before we actually open up the report and I put it on the screen about why this report was done in the first place. There was a special town meeting of Canton, of the people of Canton, where they voted that they wanted to do an audit of the police department. So a procurement committee was established and it sought proposals, and this is the report that is the result. The Boston Herald says that this report cost the city of Canton $198,000. They say in the report that they interviewed 55 people, 40 police officers, numerous town officials, and a few random interested citizens also. It was not due until April 30th, but it got done nearly a month early and dropped yesterday on April 1st. I don't think that is a coincidence. That is also the same day that jury selection began in the Karen Reed retrial. So why does this matter? Why is this question of whether or not the evidence was handled properly, about whether the investigation was done properly, why does that matter? Why is it relevant? Well, because of the fact that Karen Reed, under Massachusetts law, can talk about whether or not proper procedures were followed by the police. And here's a quote from a Massachusetts case called Commonwealth v. Bowden that we've heard a lot about in the case, if you've been following it. The fact that certain tests were not conducted or certain police procedures not followed could raise a reasonable doubt as to the defendant's guilt in the minds of the jurors. It was talking about that other case, and in that case it said the judge should not have removed this evidence from the jury's consideration, and in so doing invaded the province of the jury to decide what inferences to draw from certain evidence. And in so doing, invade, I don't think it was past tense. But in any event, what they're saying there is Karen Reed is entitled to talk about the fact that she believes that things weren't done. Another quote from that case: the failure of the authorities to conduct certain tests or produce certain evidence was a permissible ground on which to build a defense in the circumstances of this case. So that's a different case, but used to make the argument. In fact, that was cited by the judge herself in one of the briefs and one of the orders that she recently filed. So I want to dive into the report, and I've done a lot of thinking about how to make this most kind of understandable to you. And I'm going to start with this. I'm going to start with sort of what this was about. I'm going to show you in the report what it's about. Then I think I'm going to go straight from there to the analysis, because yes, there is actual analysis of the Karen Read, John O'Keefe investigation. They actually go straight into it and talk about it. So I'm going to go into that so you can see that. And then I'm going to go backwards in terms of how the report is written to what their recommendations are, because I think that's where you're going to see why I think this helps the Karen Read team and does not help the Commonwealth as much as they will think it does, because it is really written from a pro-law enforcement, pro-prosecution standpoint. You'll see that as we go through it. So let's go ahead and add the report to the stage. I don't think I'm even at the right page. Let me pull this up. I'm going to head backwards to number 1. So this report is just brand new issued, and it entitles itself Independent On-Site Audit of the Town of Canton Police Department. And I wanted you to see this very first thing right here. 5SI, that's the name of the company doing it, 5 Stones Intelligence. 5SI's report does not make any findings of fact or conclusions of law regarding ongoing criminal investigations or pending legal matters involving the Canton Police Department. Now, one of the key reasons that that statement is there is so that the Commonwealth and the judge can look at that and say, look, this isn't even a finding of fact. It's not a conclusion of law. This shouldn't be admitted at trial. We're not going to let it in. I don't know, though, the Commonwealth may want this in. So we're going to take a look at it. It's very directly related to what happened in this case. You will see as we go. So let's go ahead and look at some of the initial statements about what the report was all about. They talk about the fact that, and they did this fast, November 18th to March 30th, they were on site at the Canton Police Department for 12 weeks, which was pretty much most of that time. They did interviews with 40 police officers, with other town employees. Let me make sure you can see it. Yes. Okay. And that prior to this, they make a point of saying no one from the company had met any current or former employees of the Canton Police Department, the Police Audit Committee, or the Select Board. That's the governing body in Canton. So they're saying, look, we weren't just picked because we had a close relationship and they could count on us to do a cover-up. We were picked even though we had no connection inside the Canton Police Department. And they make a point of talking about how helpful the Canton police were. They say here, the officers who agreed to be interviewed were candid, cooperative, and forthright. Each officer was interviewed in private with no supervisors present. No senior member of the Canton Police Department command staff or town officials interfered with or attempted to influence the information and or findings in this report. So they're trying to squelch the idea that the reason they come out kind of pro-Commonwealth, pro-law enforcement, is because they either had some connection there or because people there were trying to influence them. And I also wanted you to note this, the part I put inside red there, not included in the audit. They make a point of saying reinvestigation of any cases or finding of fact, analysis of evidence collected in ongoing or prior criminal cases, and rendering any opinion of guilt or innocence of a party. But I will say, reinvestigation, that is something that, if you ask me, as you look through this, there is some reinvestigation that goes on, at least to this extent, at least to the extent of looking at it and saying that wasn't sufficient, that something different should have been done. So you'll see that as we go through the report. During the examination, the audit team assessed the response and crime scene procedures carried out by Canton Police Department officers on January 29th, 2022. That's the day John O'Keefe's body was discovered in the snow outside Brian Albert's home. Karen Read, of course, has been charged with murder in connection with that, with second-degree murder and with other lesser charges such as manslaughter. involving the tragic death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe at 34 Fairview Road in the early morning hours. These actions were compared against existing policies, regulations, and requirements to determine compliance. So looking at it kind of broad picture, here's what happened. The people of Canton were concerned, as anyone would be, by the reports in a lot on social media, some in the mainstream media, about whether or not this investigation was done properly. And they were looking into what had happened. They were looking inside it and saying, we want to know, are the police corrupt? Was this improperly done? We'd like an audit of this. And so they requested it, and this is what the outcome was. So they paid nearly $200,000 of the city's money for this report. Observations and findings. First responding officers should have photographed Boston police officer John O'Keefe at the location of where he was found before fire rescue moved him to the rescue. And we'll go into more detail about this later. But they're saying one of the problems, if you will recall, that Karen Reed talked about was the fact that nobody bothered to document where the body was. So when it came time for the trial, there was a lot of dispute about where exactly it was. Second, all interviews of critical witnesses, including Jennifer McCabe and Carrie Roberts, should have been conducted at Canton Police Department on January 29th, 2022, after John O'Keefe was transported to the hospital. So the interviews, and one of the complaints by Karen Reed's team again is that the interviews were done in kind of a cozy, we're going to protect these people. These guys are on the inside. This is a Boston police officer. So we're going to make sure that these people are protected, and that was, and they are saying indeed the interviews should have been more formal. They should have been down at the Canton Police Department, not just chatting with somebody outside the police department. Consensual recorded witness interviews should have been conducted. So they should have recorded them and made that available then to the defense. The MSP, Massachusetts State Police, along with Canton Police Department, should have maintained a police presence at 34 Fairview Road pending the secondary search conducted by Massachusetts State Police crime scene units. Because again, one of the problems was that everybody left the scene. The allegation made by Karen Reed's team is during this period of time when Canton Police left and before Massachusetts State Police arrived, that one of the officers, Trooper Proctor, went back to the scene, sprinkled the little pieces of a taillight from Karen's car, sprinkled that on the ground in order to frame her. And that no pieces were found before this time. And these were sprinkled, these were added in an effort by law enforcement to make sure she took the fall for what had happened. All right, all video footage files maintained on Canton Police Department's computer systems of Karen Reed's Lexus SUV while it was housed at Canton Police Department from January 29th through February 2nd, 2022 should have been requested and turned over early in the Karen Reed case to lead investigators for any action is deemed appropriate. Huge issue, as you all know, from the first trial of Karen Reed. And during the first trial, one of the most explosive pieces of evidence was this Sallyport video where Karen Reed's car was actually placed in a garage that was sort of part of, adjacent to the police department. And during the course of her being there, during the course of the car being there, they took video of that. At the first trial, the video was shown to the jury, and through that to the public, was shown to the jury, and it was mirrored. And that mirrored footage made it look like nobody had gone near the taillight that was broken out and that Karen Reed says was broken intentionally by cops to frame her. And as it turned out, when they turned the video properly, at that point, you could see that people actually had gone near it. So that became very controversial. And what they're saying here is all these video footage files, they should really have been maintained. That should have all been turned over early in the case and wasn't. So let me make sure I have covered. Yep, I've covered everything there for you. I want to switch over. Nope, there's one more thing I want to talk about, because this is a theme throughout this, and I find it really interesting. We're going to go into it a little bit more in detail. I'm going to flip down here to page 12. We'll go back and forth as we're going through it. Am I here? Yep, there I am. Okay. So there is a heavy theme to this of disliking social media, of disliking a group they derisively call influencers. Those influencers who are out there trying to make it look like the Canton police have done something wrong, because clearly they didn't. And there's a theme to that through here. But here you can get a little flavor of it here, where they write, the audit team observed Chief Rafferty's leadership style and found her approach and decision-making abilities to be effective throughout. They pump up Chief Rafferty, the chief of the police in Canton, and they say she's doing a good job. There's a notable decrease in morale among department members, largely due to public scrutiny regarding the Canton Police Department's handling of the crime scene and the investigation into the death of Canton resident and Boston police officer John O'Keefe. While constructive feedback is beneficial, the continuation of personal criticisms has transformed from a method for improvement to personal attacks. These attacks via various avenues such as social media, phone calls, emails, and public demonstrators have had a significant negative impact on morale within the department. Social media personalities have claimed that the Canton Police Department deliberately mishandled the crime scene where Mr. O'Keefe was found on January 29th, 2022, and implied a possible cover-up within the department to hide the circumstances around Mr. O'Keefe's death. Following her arrest, Karen Reed and her legal team have asserted there is a conspiracy and cover-up involving law enforcement and witnesses. Influential figures on social media from various regions have been tracking and amplifying these claims. Multiple Canton Police Department officers have stated that they have experienced harassment from the public while working, spending personal time with their families and children, and during off-duty police details. A gathering of individuals supporting the Free Karen Reed movement regularly protest outside the Canton Police Department. There have been numerous accounts of officers encountering harassment, both in person and online, including through emails, voicemails, social media platforms, and YouTube. Members of the audit team have received emails and text messages prompting team members to investigate allegations and alleged cover-ups by police. While tensions are strained within the community, it is incumbent upon the leadership for the town of Canton to remain unbiased and objective. Let's talk about that for just a minute, because they are putting a lot at the feet of social media and suggesting it's really social media that is this problem, that social media has suggested there was a possible cover-up. First of all, they are only hired because of the possibility of a cover-up. That's the whole reason for them to be there, is to discuss the possible cover-up. So statements such as it's not helpful to suggest cover-up would mean they would be out of a job. They are there to make sure that there wasn't one, to determine whether there was, as well as to determine what needs to change within the Canton Police Department. It was to be a complete audit, turn it inside out, see if there's anything that's improper going on. In addition to that, they make the statement that social media has spread this. Social media has done these things, but then they talk about that being Karen Reed's legal defense. There is clearly nothing wrong with social media talking about what someone's defense to a crime is. You may not agree with it. You may think that Karen Reed is extremely guilty, but certainly social media influencers should be allowed to talk about what a defendant's defense is. There's nothing strange about that. It's part of what the public discourse should be about this case. All right, so let's flip over. And by the way, I also want to add this. I do not doubt for 1 minute that the police department has had an extremely difficult time. And I don't doubt that they are extremely worried about their families and that morale is low. And it is not entirely their fault. Let me be really clear on that. I just think that to suggest that the idea that social media would talk about a potential cover-up, which is why they've been hired and what they're supposed to look at, the idea that that in and of itself is bad is absurd. I think that's exactly what social media should be talking about, is any sorts of oversight into the government and into what is being done within our government authorities, such as the law enforcement here. I think that's important. That's exactly what media is supposed to do. Do they take it too far? Have individuals taken it too far? We'll read some more about that later. I don't doubt that that has happened, that occasionally that has happened. But this seems different. As you heard me read it, it was broad brush, all social media, and the very prospect of discussing in general this idea that there was a cover-up is bad. And that I really disagree with. So we're going to flip forward to the much further along. We are going to add that. We're going to go to page 92 is what I have when they get to the discussion about the Karen Reed case. Then we'll flip back to their specific recommendations for changes within the department, certain things that they think should be done. So let's take a look, and I'm going to read parts of this, not all of it. It's pretty lengthy, even the specific part. One of the things they did that's super helpful, I am really big into timelines. I love a good timeline. And they give us one. They give us a timeline here. So I'm going to have to go back and fit it into my timeline. Do they have some things I don't have? Anyway, I'm very excited about this. And they just go through everything that happened that morning, getting a 911 call, dispatching officers, when people got there. There are just a couple of things I want to point out to you in this timeline, because that's important, but not for tonight. Tonight, we're looking at something different. A couple of things. They put Miss Reed and Miss McCabe in the back seat of a patrol car. And one of the recommendations is that witnesses are going to need to be interviewed separately, but they kept interviewing witnesses together throughout the investigation. Exactly one of the things that Karen Reed's attorneys have complained about. Taking a statement, they talked about taking a statement from Miss McCabe on scene. Remember, they wanted those things being done at the police department. I'm not exactly sure why. I don't know if they just felt like it was more official, or if maybe they wanted to make sure the recording abilities were there, but they seem to feel strongly that all statements should have been taken at the scene. Obviously, I'm sure they could take a little bit of information from somebody. Not at the scene, should be at the police station. I'm sure they could take at least a little bit of information on scene, but everything else they were supposed to do at the police station. They talked about Brian and Nicole Albert, who were interviewed right there in their homes and provided statements right there. Sergeant Lank was contacted by Miss McCabe, who asked him to come back over to the house, so no one was transported or asked to come to the police station. They kept doing the interviews at 34 Fairview Road, where John O'Keefe's body was found. Now, they have some photographs of the snow outside the home, of the blood that was in the snow. You remember, one of the most controversial things from the Karen Reed trial, the first one, was that plastic Solo cups, the red plastic Solo cups, were used to collect evidence, including blood from the scene. It was put into plastic Solo cups that a neighbor brought over because the police had nothing to use to collect crime scene evidence. And so you can see that right here, the blood in the snow, and they're going to talk about that. All right, so let's start reading a little bit of this. Lieutenant Paul Gallagher arrived at 7 a.m. and was brought to the area where John O'Keefe's body was found. Due to the heavy snow and winds, detectives utilized a leaf blower to identify evidence. Canton Police Department took photos and videotaped the evidence collection. Both Sergeant Lank, Sergeant Good, and Lieutenant Gallagher searched the area and discovered a broken drinking glass and small amounts of blood. Canton Police Department detectives reported that they only searched an area around where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, which would not have encompassed the entire yard area. Canton Police Department detectives secured the blood evidence in red Solo cups and placed them in a Stop and Shop grocery bag. The drinking glass was secured in an evidence bag, and all evidence was taken to Canton Police Department. The cocktail glass was turned over to the Massachusetts State Police crime technicians for testing on February 1st, 2022. Detectives said the blood evidence was secured in a refrigerator in the evidence property room, Massachusetts State Police crime lab technicians took custody of the evidence on February 1st, 2022. So let's talk about some of the things you see there. First of all, the leaf blower. Using a leaf blower to identify evidence was, at the first trial, highly controversial. Karen Reed's team saying, what are you doing using a leaf blower? That's not exactly professional grade equipment for the police to use. But you will see in this report, they actually say, congrats, great idea using a leaf blower. So you can make your own decision, but they support it. We're going to read that in just a minute. They found some items there at the scene that was controversial. They found, for example, the broken drinking glass, small amounts of blood, but they did not find those broken pieces of the taillight from Karen Reed's car. So that's what they're talking about. They also are mentioning in here collecting evidence in red Solo cups, and the way they took it in, that it was just left in the refrigerator over the weekend. All of these things happened on Saturday morning, and nothing got turned over, probably because of the snowstorm. Nothing was turned over to the Massachusetts State Police until Tuesday. So there was this period of time when the Canton police were in charge of all the evidence. They had it all. And that is the period of time when Karen Reed says a lot of things occurred that shouldn't have. Thomas Kelleher, Canton Police Department Deputy Chief of the Investigative Division, who resided across the street from 34 Fairview Road, provided the Solo cups to the detectives. Detective Chief Kelleher recused himself from the investigation because he knew the Albert family, who were the owners of the home at 34 Fairview Road. One thing I want to mention, ironic about that, because at no point did they even look around the home or investigate the home or consider whether or not the Alberts who owned the home might have actually been involved in this crime. They didn't do that. And so the idea that he had to recuse himself because he knew the homeowners is highly ironic. Why? If they weren't going to be investigated in any way, what did it matter? It was simply the location of a body, and it was in the front yard, and nothing was suspicious about the people inside. I find that really interesting because it seems to me more likely that he recused himself because he assumed there would be some kind of investigation within the home and of the people inside. And clearly there was not from that point on. The report goes on to say that people were recusing themselves left, right, up, down for not much reason, including this guy. Knowing the people is not enough reason to recuse yourself. So that's one of the points they make later on. Later in the morning at approximately 9 a.m., I don't think I skipped a paragraph. Anyway, Miss McCabe called Sergeant Lank at the Canton Police Department and asked him to come to 34 Fairview Road. Minutes later, Sergeant Lank and Lieutenant Gallagher responded to 34 Fairview Road and were met by Miss McCabe, who reported that she recalled when Miss Reed was driving with her, Reed, she said something to the effect of, "I hope I didn't hit him." Miss McCabe said Reed also made the same statements at 34 Fairview Road when they, meaning Karen Reed, Roberts, and McCabe, found John O'Keefe. And then they make a point of saying here, note, this information was documented in Sergeant Lank's investigative reports, again, supporting the Commonwealth's view of this. Canton Police Department detectives said they did not have probable cause to obtain a search warrant and did not request permission to search the Albert house, as they had no information that Mr. O'Keefe ever entered the home at the time. Now, here's an example where I told you that this is, in their minds, I think they believe they came out pretty pro-Commonwealth. And here's an example. They just add a note. It's not even part, a direct statement. They have to put it in quotes and say, note, a search warrant infringes on an individual's Fourth Amendment rights and requires substantial evidence or witness testimony, neither which was present in this case. Moreover, Canton Police Department did not seek permission to search the house, as there was no indication that Mr. O'Keefe was inside or that a crime had occurred inside the house. Now, the only reason for adding that little set off, that little note, is to say, look, we just want you to know we support the Canton Police Department for not going in to search the house. There was no indication a crime had occurred there. And I go back to the question, why then did the deputy chief need to recuse himself because the Alberts owned the home? What was the reason that he had to recuse himself? To me, it's that he was concerned that the home could be involved, that there at a minimum would be an investigation there. So, but they throw this in, and it's very pro law enforcement. It's also not really directly a part of the report. Talking about what a search warrant does is not really a direct part of the report. All right, so then they show ring camera photos. We've seen some of those. There was question about whether or not the small crack and break in Karen Reed's taillight that she admits was there earlier came from her backing in. So you can see a little bit of that. We're going to skip down to this. Attorneys for Miss Reed claimed that Mr. O'Keefe was assaulted and his body was later placed outside of 34 Fairview Road, Canton, Massachusetts, as part of an alleged cover-up by law enforcement. Again, a little aside by them. Note, and this is, our team has not discovered any information that would indicate that any actions by Canton Police Department officers or detectives were part of a conspiracy to frame any individual for the murder of Mr. O'Keefe. So they're saying, look, we just want you to know we don't see a conspiracy. We don't see that the Canton police were actively working with the Alberts or anyone else to try to convince everybody that they were not involved in defraying Karen Reed. We don't see it. You know, that is obviously very pro-Commonwealth. That would help the Commonwealth if this came in. But it's also an actual statement of the ultimate fact that is being alleged, at least the ultimate fact related to Karen Reed's defense. So I don't know that the court would allow that in, because it's a statement that's just their opinion, and I assume they're not going to be present to testify at trial. We don't know yet. I am sure both sides are scrambling, trying to figure out what to do with this very important report and very important piece of potential evidence. Do they want it in? Maybe they don't. It has negative things for both sides. So we'll talk about that more toward the end. All right, and now the Sallyport, because they did a specific section on this, complete with an additional note supporting the Commonwealth. Okay. Video footage evidence of Karen Reed's Lexus SUV 570 at Canton Police Department, Sallyport. On January 29th, 2022, Massachusetts State Police executed a search warrant for Miss Reed's Lexus sports utility vehicle in Dighton, Massachusetts at Miss Reed's parents' home. The audit team found Massachusetts State Police requested that Miss Reed's vehicle be brought back to Canton Police Department. Chief Rafferty said the request, just a second, I lost my, said this request was granted because the Canton Police Department is near the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, and Massachusetts State Police did not have adequate temperature-controlled storage facilities close by. Massachusetts State Police coordinated for, do I have this? Yes, I do. Okay. Coordinated for the Lexus SUV to be towed to the Canton Police Department garage and arrived at the Canton Police Department garage at approximately 5:35 p.m. on January 29th, 2022. Canton Police Department video cameras documented the Lexus SUV arriving at the Canton Police Department Sallyport on January 29th, 2022. Shortly thereafter, Massachusetts State Police and Canton Police Department secured the vehicle with yellow tape surrounding the SUV. And here's their comment. Anytime you see one of these, they've all been, I think, pro-Commonwealth. Massachusetts State Police crime scene technicians searched and processed the vehicle on February 1st, 2022. Canton Police Department acknowledged, and the town of Canton has confirmed that one camera in the Sallyport records abnormally in a mirrored fashion. 3 cameras in the town of Canton have been found to have this issue, and this camera malfunction is not isolated to only the Canton Police Department cameras. So look at what it's telling us. It is telling us that there's not just one, there are many cameras that are the 3 cameras in the town of Canton, not just the Canton Police Department and not just one, which is because only one in the Canton Police Department was mirrored, but that multiple have this issue. A very strange, bizarre issue to have, right? But they are saying, yeah, we've been told. Notice this is complete hearsay. They didn't actually do any kind of investigation of their own to look at that. They were told from the Canton Police Department in the town of Canton that some of the other cameras are mirrored as well. I would expect somebody to come in and testify at this trial about that issue, because it became a real hot potato for Karen Reed's in her favor last time, as the Commonwealth tried to explain why the Sallyport video was inverted and why they had made such a big deal of it, as if it was taken in exactly the way the jury saw it, when it turned out, in fact, that it was mirrored and it should have been shown to the jury exactly the opposite. So you can see they have some photographs of the Sallyport and of the outside, where it shows 1 and 3 on the left side and 2 and 4 on the right side. So you can kind of see what it looks like. It basically just looks like a garage from the outside. It looked a little more technical on the inside. And they show a photograph of the SUV in the Sallyport. They show a few overhead shots of it. The audit team interviewed the town of Canton information technology specialist, who stated that the Canton Police Department building has 28 cameras that are placed both inside and on the exterior of the building, including in the Sallyport garage. The IT specialist said most of the cameras installed are analog cameras, low resolution, and have been in place for many years. One of the themes throughout this is that the city of Canton has underfunded the police, that a lot more money should be funneled their way so that they have enough to cover some of the equipment they need. And certainly the indication here is they need more cameras. They have old, low resolution cameras, 28 of them. Of those, apparently only one was mirrored. All the other 27 cameras were correct. But there are at least 2 others. The way it's written is kind of unclear to me whether they were saying there were 3 other cameras out in the town of Canton that way, or whether they were saying a total of 3, 1 at the police department and 2 somewhere else in the town of Canton. All right, so we're going to skip down here. In April 2024, while Miss Reed's trial was being held, Chief Rafferty directed the Canton Police Department sergeant to download additional video footage from January 29, 2022, the early morning hours footage, because it showed ATF Special Agent Brian Higgins arriving at Canton Police Department. The video was downloaded and turned over to the Massachusetts State Police. On or about January 24, 2025, Canton Police Department produced another video of Miss Reed's Lexus SUV arriving at the Canton Police Department Sallyport on January 29, 2022, and the video was downloaded and turned over to Massachusetts State Police. So it's sort of talking you through. There were repeated productions. It's been a huge complaint by Karen Reed's team, is that we should have just gotten all of these videos. We shouldn't get one, oh, we're middle of trial and there might be a point that could help the Commonwealth. Let's go find another. And that gets produced. And then later, yet another gets produced. Karen Reed's team wants to know why. All of this should have been produced straight out the bat. This shouldn't have happened. The audit team learned that the video footage files related to Miss Reed's Lexus SUV were saved in Canton Police Department computer database folders. The audit team was informed that all video evidence saved related to Miss Reed's Lexus SUV was on a Canton Police Department workstation computer. Chief Rafferty confirmed no personal computers were utilized for video storage and or used for any file storage. We're going to skip down here to the secondary search of 34 Fairview Road, another hugely controversial part of the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe. Days after the death of John O'Keefe, the police chief was driving by that exact spot and, according to the testimony, happened to look over and spot more pieces of red taillight that had not been visible before. And they argued it was because the snow was melting and they could see it now. So here's what was said. The audit team learned from Canton Police Department that on January 29th, 2024, at approximately 5:45 p.m., Massachusetts State Police Special Emergency Response Team conducted a second search at 34 Fairview Road. During that search, pieces of a red plastic taillight were recovered in addition to a Nike shoe. Over the next several days, as the snow melted, numerous taillight pieces were recovered at 34 Fairview Road by investigators informally as they traversed the area. Approximately 45 pieces in total were discovered. Conditions at the scene of the search were less than ideal. Significant snowfall had accumulated, with the center of the street being plowed, pushing snow to the side of the road. Note, the snowstorm accumulated at least 20 inches of snow in Canton, Massachusetts. On February 4, 2022, and they have some pictures on them there, as well as the middle photo is a shoe from John O'Keefe. On February 4, 2022, at 8:50 a.m., Canton Police Chief Kenneth Berkowitz summoned Sergeant Lank to 34 Fairview Road to retrieve pieces of what he believed to be part of a red plastic taillight near where John O'Keefe was discovered. Sergeant Lank, along with a Canton Police Department detective, responded to 34 Fairview Road and maintained a presence and took photos until Massachusetts State Police Trooper Yuri Buchanan responded and took custody of the evidence. I found that kind of funny. So this is John O'Keefe died January 29th. It's now February 4th. So a week has passed, and there has been no maintaining a presence of the scene. No one's been kept off the scene. It's just been left. And now they discover these pieces and somebody comes out and maintains a presence. I mean, it's been unguarded for 6 days. So I don't know what additional help there is with this maintaining a presence before the Massachusetts State Police get there, but that's what they're talking about here. Here's a very important finding. Canton Police Department detectives did not have access to evidence collection kits in Canton Police Department vehicles or at the Canton Police Department headquarters to secure the blood evidence located near the body of Mr. O'Keefe at 34 Fairview Road. Canton Police Department detectives stated they only utilized solo cups as a last resort to preserve the forensic evidence until it was transferred to the Massachusetts State Police Crime Scene Forensic Unit. Throughout, there are references to the idea that the Canton Police should have had collection tools in their cars. They should have had those readily available, and they didn't. They didn't have them in their cars. They didn't have them back at the station, which left them resorting to things like solo cups brought by a neighbor instead of actual vials or things that are clean and ready to preserve evidence from a crime scene. And they're saying, Karen Reed's team argued this is an extremely ineffective, improper crime scene investigation. And this report more or less agrees with that and suggests that there should have been a lot more available to them. The audit team found Canton Police Department did not follow policies and procedures related to evidence collection and preservation. The audit team found that there were no Bureau of Criminal Identification units initially on scene, nor were crime scene kits available or used for evidence collection. And this sort of finding or statement, I think, is what makes this helpful. There were, as I mentioned earlier, numerous statements that were helpful to the Commonwealth, but this sort of statement is really helpful to Karen Reed because that's exactly what she was saying. She was saying this is a really poorly done investigation, and I can't be convicted on the basis of the way evidence was collected in this case. There is another note. According to the Massachusetts Crime Lab, plastic is not recommended for packaging or storing moist or wet evidence items due to the acceleration of the decomposition of biological materials on the evidence. Now, I think that little quote might have been more helpful to Karen Reed, but I'm not really sure if they meant that there would have been plastic within the crime scene kits if they'd been there, or if they meant the plastic solo cups were the plastic that the evidence should not have been collected in. So they go through the list again that we read quickly at the beginning. No photos were taken of the body. They used personal phones to photograph and video the evidence collection at 34 Fairview Road. Pursuant to Canton Police Department policy, a digital camera or laptop computer should have been used to photograph the crime scene. But everybody pulled out their personal phones. And again, they state in the report that no one was given a phone by the Canton Police Department. Canton Police Department first officer on the scene should have photographed John O'Keefe where he was found before he was moved by fire rescue to the ambulance. And of course, that became a controversial issue in the trial. If he was moved, where were the pieces of taillight in comparison to where his body was? It was very difficult to answer that question because no one had taken a photograph of his body there at the scene. Jennifer McCabe and Carrie Roberts should have been interviewed, and the interviews should have been recorded at the Canton Police Department after Mr. O'Keefe was taken to the hospital. Nicole and Brian Albert should have been interviewed at Canton Police Department. Both Massachusetts State Police and Canton Police Department failed to maintain police presence at 34 Fairview Road to maintain the integrity of the crime scene. And they say they should have coordinated. They should have figured it out. They should have put everybody there. All video footage files maintained on Canton Police Department's computer system of Karen Reed's Lexus SUV while it was housed at Canton Police Department should have been requested and turned over early in the Karen Reed case to lead investigators for any action as deemed appropriate. Due to the blizzard conditions on the morning of January 29, 2022, and the coordination of personnel, the Massachusetts State Police waited until after 4:45 p.m. to begin coordinating a secondary search of the crime scene at 34 Fairview Road. Each piece of evidence should be carefully logged and tracked to establish the timeline of its handling. Officers should refrain from using personally owned phones to video or photograph crime scenes, and once evidence is processed, it should be stored in a secure and controlled environment such as an evidence room with restricted access. And so they go through a list of recommendations that go along with this, like more training for patrol officers, and such as the chief ought to look over death investigation police reports. And we need to redo this whole policy about personal cell phones, and people shouldn't be using their personal cell phones. And that everybody ought to be given a full crime scene kit, including bags, sealing equipment, and digital cameras, and none of that was given to them. Department phones should be placed in patrol cars for officers to utilize to document crime scenes. And that Canton Police, basically that they say down here, I'll read it. Prevailing law dictates that the Massachusetts State Police or the district attorney's office will lead death investigations, but it does not preclude the Canton Police Department from assisting MSP in such investigations. The audit team recommends Canton Police Department should engage and support MSP and district attorney's office as deemed appropriate. I think what they're saying from that is what needs to be happening is that the Canton Police Department needs to be ready to step up to assist, because there may be situations like this one where they're at the scene and they're going to call in Massachusetts State Police, but Massachusetts State Police is not going to be there for a while. And so they have to be prepared. They have to have the equipment to collect the evidence. They have to know how to collect the evidence. And those things need to be being done while they're waiting for Massachusetts State Police. They have to be ready to step in and handle this as needed. So let's go back to the conclusion, which is, of course, pro-Commonwealth. The audit, and by of course, I mean, of course, based on what we've seen so far, the audit team found no evidence supporting claims that any Canton Police Department officers tampered with evidence located at the 34 Fairview Road crime scene. The audit team further found that the only Canton police officers that should have been recused from the police investigation at 34 Fairview Road were Detective Kevin Albert and Deputy Chief Kelleher. Canton Police Department has full investigative authority to work in concert with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office and Massachusetts State Police on death investigations. Based on interviews and review of investigative reports, the audit team determined that Canton Police Department, as first responders, worked on the initial crime scene and conducted initial interviews of some witnesses at the scene. The audit team did find policy and procedure failures related to crime scene processing. In other words, that the Canton police were actually there. They were actually collecting evidence. They were actually interviewing witnesses, and there were policy and procedure failures. That means they messed up related to processing that crime scene. That's exactly what Karen Reed has argued. The audit team has determined that Canton Police Department's internal controls and compliance oversight have improved since the initiation of this audit, and that effective leadership is in place to supervise future critical incidents. The audit team has advised Chief Rafferty regarding our recommendations, and Chief Rafferty has confirmed the implementation of new crime scene procedures. Okay, let's stop there for a while. First of all, I want to say thank you, Bethany, for gifting 5 Lawyerly memberships. Membership is just a way to financially support the channel, but we are about to have we have at least once a month a meeting of all the people who are members, and we are going to be having our second go round. We are writing a crime novel, a true crime novel, using AI and votes from y'all, and the members are getting together, and we're just doing that for fun. It was so much fun the first time. So we, in between now and next Wednesday, we are going to be having a meeting. There are people who are at associate level of membership. They're going to be meeting separately and coming up with 3 potential villains. So we're going to add that into what the primary members have already done. We're going to be adding chapter 2 next week, Wednesday night after the live stream. So members, get ready for that, and that is going to be a lot of fun. All right, so let's see. Let's talk a little bit, and thank you, Bethany, for gifting 5 Lawyerly memberships. And Michael, I'm glad to hear that your dog is doing better. Michael has been a member for 12 months. That's fantastic. All right, so let's get started. So one of the things that they talk about throughout this is, let me show you page 64, because I was personally surprised by this. All right. And let me make sure I can find the right spot. Yeah. The innovative use of a leaf blower to systematically search through the snow-covered crime scene was instrumental in uncovering evidence near Mr. O'Keefe's body. So they fully supported the concept of using a leaf blower. That was one of the things Karen Reed's team had argued was completely poor, that it had no legitimate use at a crime scene. It's not exactly a tool, but they argued that, yep, that was just fine, and in fact, innovative. That was responsible for allowing the collection of evidence. It was used to melt the snow. Obviously not enough, since later on more pieces of taillight were found, but partially melt the snow and to find some pieces of evidence along the way. All right, and I do want to make sure that you see the anti-social media, because I think that's pretty interesting. I think you will be interested in that, since all of you like YouTube, like me. All right, so they talk about personal attacks. I do not doubt there have been some. I do not doubt some have been inappropriate, but here's what they say. Various social media figures have alleged the Canton Police Department intentionally mishandled the crime scene where Mr. O'Keefe was discovered on January 29th, 2022, and suggested a conspiracy. And I'll skip a little bit. Karen Reed and her defense team have alleged that there's a cover-up and conspiracy involving law enforcement and witnesses. Social media influencers across the country have fueled these allegations. They talk about the audit team has found that multiple family members of Canton Police Department officers have been subjected to harassment by various individuals, both residents and non-residents, including a social media figure. In one instance, a social media figure contacted the wife of a Canton Police Department officer and left a disrespectful voicemail on her cell phone, disparaging her husband and spreading accusations about his character. Additionally, an officer was harassed by the same social media figure while attending a New England Patriots football game. The chief of police faced harassment from individuals during an off-duty assignment at Gillette Stadium, etc. That it's continued, that other things have happened. We'll skip through that. The audit. Okay, so, and I want to be really clear on this. I don't disagree at all that there may have been wildly inappropriate behavior toward the police. When someone is doing an off-duty assignment at Gillette Stadium, nobody should be harassing them or bothering them. The constant connection, though, between any belief that there was, in fact, any belief of Karen Reed's defense and social media, and that the whole thing is improper, you can see that right there in that paragraph. It also says the audit team has found that certain individuals use the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, to obtain information. And they find that wildly inappropriate. Such requests strain the Canton Police Department's resources. For example, a citizen who received a traffic violation used FOIA to request details on all instances in the town of Canton where drivers were pulled over and ticketed for using their phones while driving, despite having a clean driving record. Requests such as these place a significant burden on Canton Police Department resources. Now, I completely disagree with that. FOIA is a statute, Freedom of Information Act. Most states have it, maybe all, and the federal government has it as well. And it requires the government to be transparent. If you request documents, the government must provide them. So they're equating that certain individuals use the Freedom of Information Act to obtain information about ongoing police investigations. That's what it says. That's exactly what it should be used for, is to obtain information about, and it could be that they have a rule that ongoing police investigations, they're entitled to extra time. They don't have to produce it to you right away. But finding out what the government is doing is exactly what FOIA is about. That's what it's supposed to be. So the idea that somebody received a traffic violation and wanted to know who else has received this, that is part and parcel of being able to ask the government what exactly it is that they're doing. We're entitled to do that. All right, let's see it. Yep, down here. Officers explain certain individuals referred to as influencers are spreading false narratives about officers involved in the O'Keefe and Birchmore cases without any substantiating evidence. So it's just, those are totally different things. The idea that someone's on social media or an influencer is completely different from spreading false narratives. Spreading false narratives is wrong, but being on social media is not. They're different. These influencers are primarily motivated by financial gain, fabricating sensational stories based on speculation to attract public attention. They operate without adhering to journalistic standards or rules of evidence, gaining notoriety by circulating unfounded narratives in pursuit of fame and viewership. Again, I completely agree that people in the media, including on social media, should not be spreading false narratives. I completely agree that people should adhere to rules of evidence, to journalistic standards. All of those things are true, but that does not mean that they should not be allowed to speak. And one of the things that bothers me the most about this report is it equates anyone saying anything negative about the police with spreading false narratives. All social media is bad. And I think that it makes the report look fairly biased. I think it's a shame that they did that, because I do not agree with that at all. All right, so let's see if I have any other pages I want to take you to. We've gone to 132. So the various, I mentioned at the end, I would talk a little bit about what it is that they've recommended be done in order to try to make sure that these problems that cropped up in the John O'Keefe investigation do not ever happen again. And let's take a look at page 25. So they talk about the need to separate interviewees from each other prior to and during questioning. They talk about the need to record interviews, and that's really important. Keeping them all apart is how you're going to make sure that you're getting the correct information from everybody, not that they're influencing each other. Let's go to page 27. All right. All Canton Police Department sergeant vehicles should be equipped with digital cameras for photographing and memorializing crime scenes, and it should be required. All evidence should be photographed at the time of seizure by detectives, captured on body-worn cameras by patrol officers when possible. And detectives should attend a crime scene preservation class so they know what should be collected, how should it be collected, what's going to happen in court when you actually try to produce this evidence, What's it going to look like? They talk about the need to do role playing and to do some modeling where people could kind of understand what it would be like and why these things are important. They talk about the need for every police department vehicle to have crime scene preservation kits. The fact that they didn't have that is why they were forced to do things like collect evidence in red Solo cups. So they talk about training. They talk about double training for officers who will be in the field. They talk about not using your personal phone. They talk about hiring more personnel and numerous suggestions about what exactly should be done. Wait, there I am. Sorry about that. I meant to remove this. So you can see from this report that it is a mixed bag. Many of the suggestions in there, many of the statements in there are clearly pro-Commonwealth, pro-police department. They are statements that exonerate them or that say that what happened in the O'Keefe investigation really wasn't that big a deal. There were those comments set aside in italics that were specifically aimed to talk about those sorts of things. They did not find any kind of conspiracy within the department. Let me get a drink of water. They didn't find or conclude that there was some kind of conspiracy where the police department was working to get Karen Read. They didn't see any of that. On the other hand, over and over again, the things that they talked about as they went through and detailed the investigation of John O'Keefe's death were the exact sorts of things that Karen Read has been talking about for over a year about how the investigation was conducted. So they were using personal cameras. They didn't have an evidence collection kit. They left the scene unattended for a lengthy period of time. They had an old camera that reversed an image. All of those things Karen Read's team has been talking about. So I think it's a mixed bag. There is a lot in here for both sides to use, in my view, because I think a lot of the sort of more conclusory statements like the Commonwealth did just fine with this or that, I think a lot of that would probably need to be cut out before the jury could see it. But I don't know what the sides are going to want to do. They're going to have to look at this 200 pages, and it is a mixed bag. They're going to have to decide, do we even want to fight for this? Do I want to fight to get a chance to use this in court? And how this report? I think overall that the report comes down more strongly for Karen Read. And I think that because of the fact that it is so specific, it is related to this investigation. I don't know whether you're probably wondering, will the court let it in? I don't know. I don't know whether either side will even push for that. We have a lot left to do to find out about that. I mean, I wish I could give you a plain yes or no, but the deal is it just depends. It depends on what both sides are going to decide to do with it. It has good, it has bad for both sides. It's not a slam dunk. But personally, I do think it leans in Karen Read's favor. I think they at least have to be considering how to get parts of this in front of a jury. Both sides are probably going to argue that some sections should come in and other sections should be cut out before it goes to the jury. If the judge picks and chooses, at that point, it's really hard to evaluate whether they want it in or not, because if the judge eliminates all the best parts for Karen Read, well, then it's a full-on negative for her side and good for the Commonwealth, and vice versa. So another way they could use it is cross-examination. I can't say for sure what the judge will do, but this report is an absolute wild card in the middle, thrown right at the last minute into this litigation. And it definitely could shake things up in a very big way. So if you have some questions, if you would put question marks at the beginning, it'll make it a little bit easier for me to spot, and I will take a look at what you were talking about there. So Bethany, thanks again for those 5 Lawyer Lead memberships. I appreciate that. People will be looking forward to that. I know. If you haven't turned on the ability to receive a gifted membership, our mods will put in the chat how to do that, how to turn that on so you could maybe receive one. YouTube does that randomly, so we don't have any control over it. Camilla wants to know whether these recommendations look so basic that it will make the Canton department look like an irresponsible department. Good question, Camilla. Some of them, like, hey, you need evidence collection kits, does seem pretty obvious. Like, relying on neighbors for their plastic cups isn't really the way that you want to investigate a potential murder scene. And I think the problem was that this wasn't a town where there were huge crimes and people just hadn't really focused on that for the police department. They talked too about the finances of it, that the police department really needed some more people. It needed some more funding, and the city was just going to have to open up the coffers and deal with that and figure out how they were going to get that sort of thing to the police department. Tree asked about a possible Bowden defense due to this report. Yes, Tree, and we talked about Bowden. I did a quote from Bowden early on if you flip back, you will spot that. But yes, that's exactly what this report goes to, is Karen Reed's claim that the police procedures weren't followed, and that one of the quotes from that was the failure of the authorities to conduct certain tests or produce certain evidence was a permissible ground on which to build a defense in the circumstances of this case. That's from that case. And that's exactly what Karen Reed's team is arguing, that this report supports their right to tell the jury that this investigation was done improperly, and to argue that that's why she doesn't have evidence to exonerate her, and it may look like she's guilty falsely because they didn't do the investigation the way they should have. Denise asking, now Proctor has been fired. Can he be arrested for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence? So he could be, but I don't know that they have the facts for that, Denise. They'll be making a decision about that. My guess is that it's going to be straight up, nothing past that. Now, there may be civil suits. Now, that is a separate issue. But as far as any kind of criminal suit against him, the federal government did not apparently pursue that. From what we understand, they closed their investigation. So I'm guessing there won't be an arrest. Then instead, it's just going to be, the penalty will be that he was fired. Just a guess, though. All right, Loretta, who has the best mods on YouTube? Such a good question, Loretta. And the answer is we do. Thank you to Marlon and Mama Pinks who are moderating for us tonight. Connie C, do you still believe she's guilty? So I am trying to be as neutral as I conceivably can be, because I know we're going back into a brand new trial. And one of the things I want us to really focus on is the idea that a lot of our notions will come from the first trial. And I think many of you will be shocked at how different the second trial is. And people will be saying throughout it, oh, but this fact and that fact won't be in evidence, or that witness won't have said things the way it got said. And that will filter into how we perceive it. So I'm going to be trying really hard to bring you this case, these facts, and see how it shakes out this time around. S. Cipher, will this report be available if Karen Reed has to file an appeal? It's available. The defense will have to offer it as evidence for her to be able to use it on appeal, or one side or the other will have to offer it. They could offer it as a business record. It may be that the court will allow it in as a business record. It is total last minute, and no one's been deposed about it. The people who wrote the report haven't been deposed, at least as far as I know. They aren't listed on the witness list. So the judge is going to certainly have a good argument, if she wants to keep it out, that this is way too late. The question then is, well, what about cross-examination? Does it start to come in for that? It's going to be a lot for her to figure out and to decide, as well as for the attorneys. And one thing they've got to decide is whether they even want it in. Is it good enough for their side that they want it in? Can audit teams be completely partisan in Canton? I don't see any evidence that the audit team came in that way. They make a point of saying they didn't know anybody who hired them. It does sound like they talk about how they interviewed 55 people. 40 of those were police officers, and then there were a bunch of Canton town officials that they interviewed on top of that. So there weren't a lot of people outside that group. So that's mostly the group they talked to. Of course, The police themselves are the most important part of the group they ought to interview, because that's where they're going to get information about how the procedures are working and what needs to change. All right, elevate the process says, does FOIA redact addresses or personal information to prevent intimidation? It usually does, yes. Usually that would be redacted. P. Lola's mom asked, can any of the audit team be called as a witness? It's really late. Nobody has these people on their witness list. At least I don't think so. That is going to be an enormous fight. Very, very interesting. And I think battles that will reach all the way into the appeal. These are going to be important ones. Miss Moe asking, if the state believes she's so guilty, why was she released on bond, where other people on trial have to stay in jail while the case is ongoing? I don't know exactly how they made that decision, Miss Moe. It could be that it was related. Well, she made bail, obviously. Some people must not have made bail. That would be one reason. But also, I don't know if it had to do with the fact that it was second-degree murder, if the fact that it didn't seem to be a violent crime. I don't know how they made that choice. Good. It's an interesting question, though. I would like to know that, too. Tell you what, if you know that, stick that in the chat, and we'll all learn what the reasoning for that was. All right. Here's Studio saying, do the authors of this report have any forensic or law enforcement experience or training? It doesn't seem they actually investigated much beyond just interviewing people. So they mentioned some of their experience and their qualifications in the report itself. So the answer is yes, they did have some experience related to that. And so there's a ton in the report that I can't get to all of it. I was trying to condense it to roughly a little bit more than an hour for us tonight, so that you could at least get a flavor for what it's like. All right, so I will be seeing everybody on Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern. That will be our next show, and I look forward to seeing you then.